Happy November, everybody. Welcome to the Data Science Hangout. I actually just shared our 100th Data Science Hangout recording to YouTube yesterday and made me realize that we never actually celebrated that. So thank you all for being here and making this space what it is. I can't believe we're already over 100 Data Science Hangouts. If this is your first time joining us, hi. So nice to meet you. I'm Rachel. I lead customer marketing at Posit. This is our open space to chat about data science leadership, questions you're facing, and getting to hear about what's going on in the world of data across different industries. So we're here every Thursday at the same time, same place. So if you're watching this recording on YouTube later and you want to join us live, you can use the link below to add it to your calendar. But at the Hangout, we're all dedicated to making this a welcoming environment for everybody. Love to hear from everyone, no matter your years of experience, your titles, industry, or even the languages that you work in. It's totally okay to just listen in here. And I say, if you're out walking the dog, maybe you're at lunch, it's okay to just listen in. But there's also 3 ways to jump in and ask questions or add your own perspective. So you can raise your hand on Zoom, and I'll keep an eye out here. You can put questions in the Zoom chat and just put a little star next to it if it's something you want me to read out loud instead. And then lastly, we have a Slido link where you can ask questions anonymously too. And thank you, Curtis, for sharing that there in the chat. Sometimes I forget to say this, but if anybody is hiring, feel free to share any open roles in the chat as well. That's definitely not spammy at all to me. I think it's great to share those jobs in the chat too. But with that, I am so excited to introduce my co-host for today, David Sluder. David is Data Science Senior Program Manager at the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. And David, I'd love to have you just introduce yourself a bit and share a little bit about your role, but also something you like to do outside of work too.
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm really excited to be here. I've got 2 disclaimers, though, I have to start off with, right? So number one, I just want to publicly say I'm here to represent my own opinion. I am not here to represent my employer, Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, or the broader nuclear industry. Of course, I'm going to talk about them to give the conversation some context, but this is purely my opinion. And then the second piece is that I really need to make sure everyone knows that anything I talk about today is it's not just my work. So I work as part of a broader team, and the team has worked so hard to build out data science at INPO. I work with a bunch of smart, passionate people, and it's just really important that they get a lot of credit too here. So with that said, my name is David Sluder. I'm a data scientist here at INPO. I've been at INPO for almost 12 years now, only about 2 years in the data science space, about 10 years in the IT space here at INPO. And it's a really interesting company, and I didn't know anything about INPO until I started to work here. So maybe I'll kind of give you a briefer on what we are and what we do. So INPO is an independent nonprofit that is funded by our members, and our members are the nuclear power industry. So within the U.S., I think we have 54 nuclear power stations, and they all kind of pay us a member-based fee to perform our service. And now our service is that we set and assess safety and reliability standards for the nuclear power industry. So we set these standards, we send out evaluation teams to actually kind of determine how well the different stations are adhering to these standards. We kind of give them a score at the very end of that. And that we do that on a regular cadence. So we do that along with also kind of facilitating the sharing of knowledge across stations, which is really interesting in an industry where you have different companies competing together, but then also sharing information with an independent organization that allows them to kind of share what they've learned, so that we're all able to learn from each other's experiences, mistakes, challenges, that sort of thing. I've been doing, kind of data science for about 2 years now. Before that, I worked in IT. but my background is my bachelor's, you can call it my background, is in humanistic psychology, which is kind of the most qualitative thing that you could do. So it's been a fun road to figure out how I got here. Outside of work, I like to do a lot of things. I like to read, I like to laugh, and I like to travel. So this past weekend, I was able to indulge all three. Posit Conf this year was in Chicago, and it was the first time I had been to Chicago with any chance to explore it. So I got back home and I told my wife, Katie, hey, we need to go to Chicago. So we went to Chicago this past weekend, and we saw, our favorite comedian. We went to go see some improv. We found kind of a punk bookstore, which was a whole lot of fun. And we got to do just a lot of wandering around the city. So it was an awesome trip. And, I at this point kind of recommend Chicago to anyone, especially if it's the weekend before Halloween, because then you just get to ride around on the L train and watch everyone's costumes.
That's awesome. I know there were a few people from Posit who have been thinking about moving there after going for Posit conference too.
I see why. Yeah.
I see George asked, who did you see perform?
Maria Bamford. She's my
No.
favorite comedian. Number two is Kyle Kinane.
Well, David, thanks so much for the intro and sharing a little bit about your background there. I know when we were chatting, you shared some more info on how you had previously worked in IT as well. And so I was just curious to kick off the conversation with that, because it's something that comes up quite a bit in this space. But having moved from IT to data science, I know you have probably pretty unique perspectives on both sides. What would you recommend to some of us who might be struggling to communicate across those lines?
That's a good question, and I think a challenge that I hear in the Hangouts, and then also just kind of conversations I've had with other people. To me, a lot of times you have these challenges, and it really just kind of boils down to building a good relationship. So that can pan out in a lot of different ways, and it's really dependent on your organization, and I think how it's set up, and just the, kind of the general size of it. The way that we did it was, we kind of built data science, not quite from scratch, but we had one organization at InPo that did some sort of kind of data sciencey work, and then our senior leadership team kind of identified it as a strategic priority for the company to actually build out that capability. So then there was a lot of emphasis and a lot of focus on it. And that was right after I had moved into the data science organization. So we knew that data science and IT needed to work together, because every single project that we work on has an IT component to it. So some of what we did is we started having leadership meetings between data science leadership and IT leadership on some sort of regular cadence, just to kind of talk about what the roadmaps look like, what projects are on the horizon, what challenges there might be, and just kind of putting everything out in the open as much as you can, just to have those conversations. On a more personal level, I think it's really important for the two groups to kind of learn more about what each group does. So sit down with a network engineer and understand why they might be a little cautious about opening up opening up their infrastructure to all of the packages on a repo, or having a network engineer sit down with a data scientist and understand why that's a challenge for them. It really, to me, just kind of comes down to having conversations and being open and honest and transparent, and figuring out a way to move forward together.
That's great. How did you actually first start those conversations? I think you said it was at the senior leadership level, but was there something that kind of drove those initial conversations?
Well, so data science kind of became an emphasis for InPo, because the way that we were doing business was changing. So we go out and evaluate stations every 2 years. That's kind of been the regular cadence for about 30 years. but a lot can happen in between those 2-year assessments, right? So we understood that we needed to get into more of a kind of a continuous monitoring sort of fashion, and the only way that we can do that, because we don't want to go out and evaluate more often, it's a really costly thing to set up an evaluation team and send it to a station. So instead, it meant that we needed to figure out a way to use the data that we have to do some modeling, some analysis, and try to kind of understand what their quote unquote performance looks like in between those evaluations. So that was kind of where it landed at a strategic level, and then it kind of became our job to actually implement that. And having recently, it was real lucky having moved right from IT to data science and being able to kind of bring that perspective to both sides. I think put us in a really good situation, but I know that's kind of a rare situation to be in too. So, I think, yeah, just kind of like sitting down, putting your chairs in a circle and saying, what's going on? What can we work on? How do we figure this all out together? Is just kind of the right way to start.
Yeah, thank you. Russ, I see you asked a question in the chat. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, thank you. I have a master's in counseling. I love humanistic psychology. I could talk to you about that all day. How does that help you in data science? If so, can you say something about that?
I thought about that, kind of in preparation for that talk. And the more that I thought about it, the more kind of threads that I could see. Just because, a lot of data science and a lot of working in an organization in general is kind of working on relationships and communication. And actually, actively listening, that was something I remember taking a class on that when I was in college. And I feel like I still try to use those skills to this day, where you're actually sitting there in front of a person and you're hearing what they say and you're thinking about what they say instead of figuring out what you're just going to say next. So kind of having a real active listening sort of conversation, and then understanding that people are people, and we can be inconsistent and hard to understand, and really all it takes is maybe a little bit of openness and kindness to give space to the sorts of conversations that need to happen. The sorts of kind of crucial conversations that we have. We call it, that's kind of a term that we use at INPO for these sort of intense conversations that need some sort of resolution. And in my opinion, just kind of being open to that, and understanding that there's going to be some emotional reactions, and that's a-okay, because we're all human beings. But it's important to not just kind of react to them and just fan the flames. You need to figure out what the sources of the issue and address that.
Love that. Thank you. Alan, I see you have a question here. Want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Hi, David. I'm really curious. If so, my instinct is that performance metrics in nuclear power is really specific, like a super specific domain. If that's the case, I wonder how that domain expertise comes to play in the stuff you do day to day, or if maybe that's the wrong assumption and really the metrics are around efficiency and people metrics and like things that are really familiar. Like I wonder how specific what you're doing is to that industry and how you operate in that kind of environment.
That's an excellent question. So the industry metrics we get hundreds of data points from every station every month, and we use that to we end up because every station can be a little different. You've got to go through some sort of kind of like normalization scheme. So we have these indicators that are a way that we normalize the data, and then that's what we can actually do some modeling on. And I have learned just how little I know about nuclear power by moving to the industry side of things, and needing to understand exactly what every label, every acronym means. And it'll take a really long time to get to that point. And luckily, I don't need all of that to do my day-to-day job. But whenever I'm working on a really important model, I've got to make sure that I'm not making some really bad assumptions about it. So that means that I got to sit down and talk with my manager, director, or some other subject matter experts in some of the functional areas here at INPO, just to kind of make sure that whatever I don't know isn't going to actually bite me sometime. So yeah, that's a great comment.
Thanks.
I know you mentioned data science is relatively new for INPO. how have you been successful in introducing data science and data science tools?
Great question. So, introducing like a new tool to the enterprise is a really challenging thing. You can't just, say, here are some model results and expect everyone to understand what that means. So one of the changes that we've made, and it's actually kind of part of our governance that we've written, is that anytime there is, a new tool of some sort delivered, we have to figure out a way to explain it or interpret it with some other, maybe some other tool, or maybe, kind of a help function of some sort. So, one of the things that we've learned is that, delivering these model results that require some subtlety and understanding is hard to do for people that don't use it on a real frequent basis. So, we've added a lot more kind of like help functions into the tools that we build, the ways that we expose these model results. And then we've also, kind of built some other tools to, I got to talk generally, to help you understand why the model is saying what it's saying. And we've had a lot of success in, kind of thinking about things from, the end user perspective, and not at the data science perspective, to help us figure out exactly what we can do better to make sure that they use the tool correctly and they get the insight that they want out of it.
I guess kind of maybe this follows along with this a little bit, and no worries if there's certain things you can't share with us, but there was an anonymous question that was, what kind of data science use cases can you share with us in the nuclear industry and in your company?
Yeah. So, when I kind of alluded to earlier is, what kind of the impetus for data science at INPO is trying to understand performance in between the assessments every 2 years. So biennial, I never remember the word. So, we get data from the industry every month, and we have a model that helps us gauge that sort of performance in between the assessments, right? So the assessments are kind of our gold standard in the way that we know if the model is right or wrong, but it gives us an estimate in between for their performance. And then, from there, there are other things where you can, maybe kind of come up with some risk models to see if something, has a high probability of happening, and we don't obviously don't want it to happen, so we want to figure out that risk and try to get ahead of it. Let's see what else we got. I'm gonna stop there, just to make sure I keep it general enough. Sorry.
That's okay. When you share those models, who are you sharing them with, or how do you share the model with broader stakeholder groups?
So, data science at INPO, our department is actually called data science, and it's composed of kind of 3 groups. So, one is data visualization, one is kind of data analytics, and that's where I live, and then one is data quality or data management. I think we call it data quality. So, whenever I build a model, I'm just kind of having the results end up in a database somewhere, and then we rely on our incredibly capable data visualization group to actually kind of build those visualizations to deliver it to an end user. So, no one ever really gets those raw results out of the database. They get something within a broader context to help make sure that they are interpreting it correctly.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let me jump over to one other anonymous question first here. And one was, pharma has a huge emphasis on a very muddled concept of validation. Is there something like this perception of regulatory overhead that affects your work?
That exists within the nuclear industry, but it doesn't affect INPO. So there is, I remember when I worked IT, there's a group called NITSL, N-I-T-S-L, the Nuclear Information Technology and Strategic Leadership Group, which is kind of a more nuclear IT group, working group. And they have a focus on quality assurance, because there are very strict regulations that go into how you validate that a system, that like a software system, is going to do what you say it's going to do. as long as, it's going to do what you say it's going to do, and it's going to work correctly, and there's no way that it can kind of get it wrong. But that mostly affects the safety systems at a nuclear stations, as far as I understand. This is obvious, not my wheelhouse. But because we at INPO don't work directly with kind of supporting the safety system at a nuclear power station, we don't really have to kind of go through that very, very rigorous process.
Thank you. George, I think this question might be kind of related, but I saw you had a question earlier about safety assessments. You want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. I was just curious, the data that you're producing and from the assessments, is that ever shared with other federal agencies? And I was thinking of OSHA, and just been thinking more about how similar to like Novo Nordisk and their submissions to the FDA. Wondering if you're doing something like that, or if it's even possible.
We do share, some of the content from the reports. Let me make sure of that. I know the one place that we share the report, I believe it's a report, but it's definitely the assessment number, the assessment score, is the company that issues out insurance to the nuclear power industry. So our assessment score is directly linked to a nuclear station's insurance rate, which gives us a little bit of, it makes it very important that everything is right, and that there are kind of no worries, no challenges to it that can't be answered. We share some, we call it operating experience, with some other groups, but I don't think that we share the actual report with them. So it's a very kind of tightly guarded thing that we share with the senior leadership at a station, and we share at least the assessment number with the insurance group. But for the most part, we kind of hold on to the actual report findings, because there's a lot of ways that sharing that can go wrong. Sorry, not a great answer.
David, I feel like this might be a helpful conversation to open up with the group, but I know when you and I were chatting at Posit conference, we were talking a bit about how when you rolled out Posit team, it would have been helpful to know a bit more about what some other teams were doing with the products as well, to also kind of get ideas and share use cases with each other. I don't know if you want to expand on that a bit and maybe ask it to the group too.
Yeah, heck yeah. So this is kind of my question for the group is, we recently rolled out Posit team, and the modeling work that we've done at INPO has been a very particular kind of modeling work where you kind of build a big model and you deliver some results, and then it gets sent to a visualization, and that's mostly it. But I know that there is a lot more that like Posit team and other platforms offer a lot more capabilities than that, rather than just building a model and putting results in a database. And kind of coming relatively new into this space, it's been hard to just kind of figure out what are the different ways to use it. Like, what are the things that I don't know first, and then what are maybe the best ways to solve certain problems that I do know about. So at a real technical level, we have a lot of Microsoft SQL servers, and trying to use those with Posit has some challenges. So like what are the best ways to solve that? I know that Posit has a lot of really good documentation online, but I'd love to hear from people that have actually solved this problem, and kind of learn what they've learned in the process, if that makes sense. So like where would someone go to kind of learn these best practices or have this sort of conversation outside of a weekly data science hangout?
Yeah, I see. Javier, you put some thoughts in the chat. Do you want to get us going here?
I'm like mid-chew with my breakfast.
Oh, sorry.
But I'll comment in a bit here.
Okay. Who else wants to jump in then?
one of the things we had a lot of success with in a former life of mine was when we deployed reports, and a lot of these reports were sort of meant to monitor model scores over time. And so this is not helping your Microsoft issue, I'm sorry, but in terms of just use cases in general, we would do things like query in the backend. So we could run a report every day, every week, perform a query, bring in this new data that we haven't seen yet, and then run that through our models, and then get some model scores. And then we could track those model scores compared to yesterday's, last week's, whatever it is. And then we could use Blastula to send out alerts, and we could essentially create a custom report based on what we were seeing, and that could be sent out to certain individuals associated with the account in question and that sort of thing. So it's a nice handy monitoring tool.
Thanks.
I'm not chewing anymore.
Okay.
So I could pop back in, but yeah, David, I don't know if you're using dbplyr.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you know about that. That's something where I'm surprised how many R users at my company don't know of dbplyr. And so they're like creating SQL files, or they're just doing things maybe in like a 2010 view of the R world. And that's okay, because a lot of them are more like, proper statisticians who DevOps and MLOps isn't really something in their wheelhouse. Are you using, well, I assume you're using some kind of like Git backed platform like GitHub or GitLab. Something we've recently been exploring with Posit Connect is just setting up a lot of CI/CD pipelines to sort of make the whole deployment of content across different maybe like Connect instances. So if you've got different like dev or test or production instances, we're trying to sort of create a process of being hands off, like rolling up everything through a lot of CI/CD, and Posit has like excellent documentation on this stuff. So if you're not doing that, I'd definitely recommend something like that too. And it plays nicely with dbplyr also. But yeah,
I guess like kind of even at a higher level. So we have this platform, this weekly hangout that we could use to ask questions if it's the right context. But like, where do y'all go outside of this to learn about the right ways to do things, or people's experiences with different ways to do things?
Yeah, for me personally, I feel like I'm asking questions all the time in public places, internally at least. I mean, I say public, like we have so many Teams channels around data and data quality and data science and analytics and all this stuff. Like I'm pretty shameless when it comes to asking a bunch of questions on these things. At the same time, like I feel like I'm constantly helping other people, so it's like there's give and take. But I think for me it's a lot of just like on the job exposure and experience, asking people stuff that maybe I wouldn't be able to ask publicly, and just like working together to get through some of these hurdles. I mean, every team has like really unique challenges. They might be using R, but they're like they're trying to map to some network drive or something, and it's like, well, we can't really do that, or not as easily, but they want to fix. So it's like I don't know, sorry, I feel like I'm hijacking the conversation here.
What you think?
But like internal networking, I guess, is what I would summarize my comments to. That's really helped a lot for us. And I think Catherine from my company is on here too. I don't know if she has any additional comments.
Javier is totally shameless about asking tons of questions and everything. But I do think that you're right in asking about like, where do you go to get how best practices, because internally your team has or your company has a way that they do things. So getting exposure to the ways that other companies do things, like knowing what else is out there, can be really difficult. I don't personally do too much research because I try to like not work outside of work. But it does make it difficult to figure out like what else is out there to then come back to those conversations if you're setting up data scientists to IT or those kinds of conversations, to bring those ideas if you don't know what they are.
Yeah, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, and I know some industry groups like pharma have their own like R in pharma organizations as well to share things with each other. But I think a great option too is like meeting each other from within this group too, and having like smaller conversations or one-off conversations. I know some people have gotten to make friends from the data science hangouts too. So I encourage people to like connect with each other on LinkedIn too, and feel free to share your LinkedIn's in the chat too if you do want to connect with others. But I feel like I should say this here too. Something I've been thinking about is if there are certain topics that come up in a forum like this where we maybe want to dive deeper into it, could we have like a smaller group conversation following it? Maybe it's on a specific topic, like, I don't know, securing packages, or having the conversation with IT about using open source packages, or maybe it's about Shiny in production or something like that. So I'll think a bit more on that as well.
Yeah, the challenge for us is, we at INPO are pretty new to this, so there isn't that sort of kind of institutional knowledge that we can reach out and question other people about it. So it's at this point, either kind of talking to other people in the nuclear industry, and we do have a data science industry working group that we've set up at INPO, but across the nuclear industry, and we're starting to get some good traction with that. But even past that, it's good to have conversations with people of different, in different industries, just to kind of understand, how they might think about things differently.
Absolutely. Justin, I see you had a question a bit earlier. Justin Lee, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I am looking back to see what my question was.
No worries. I can ask your question if you want to add context too, but
Please do.
The question was, speaking generally, how is the industry beginning to use natural language processing?
Okay. I'll tell you the little that I know. So I know that some places have set up, their own private instances of ChatGPT, because nuclear data is regulated, tightly regulated. So you have to be really careful about what infrastructure it lives on. So generally speaking, we're going to want to keep things on premise, in our own domains, rather than use something on Azure or AWS if we can. So people have set up private instances of ChatGPT to try to kind of understand how it could be used for their organizations. And there has been, kind of some success, but as you all probably know, not everything that comes out of ChatGPT is correct, even if it sounds like a good, well-formed sentence. So there's that. And then, there's a lot of interest in trying to figure out how to look at, this is a pretty well-known kind of program across stations, so I don't think it's wrong to talk about it. So stations have something called a corrective action program. So, kind of generally speaking, anytime there is an event, something goes wrong, whether that's someone, tripping on the sidewalk, walking into the station, or there's a reactor scram, there is a report written up about that. And for a single unit station, I think there's probably 600 people working there, and that means there are a lot of these reports that get written, and at a certain point you have a whole lot of text data and not enough people or the right technology to actually kind of trend it and track it well. So there's a lot of interest right now in understanding how to use this kind of history of CAP records to understand, kind of the behaviors that might influence performance. So those are the two kind of big use cases I've heard so far.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question I think I maybe saw earlier, maybe something anonymous as well. Actually, let me shift gears for a second. I know when we were chatting before, you were talking a little bit about how you're hiring for a role. And I thought it might be good to just discuss a little bit of what you've learned recently in trying to fill a data science role too.
It is, it's challenging, as a lot of you probably know. So we did actually fill the role. The person hasn't started yet, but kind of everything's been signed, so we're good there. And I feel like I learned a lot about what it takes to hire a data scientist in that process. So we found that we got a lot of success using recruiters versus just kind of having an open job posting, just because the market is pretty well flooded, and we wanted someone that had some particular natural language experience. So instead of going through the mountain of resumes, it was a little bit easier to have people help us find people who were looking and people who had the right sort of resume, and then from there going through the technical screen to make sure that they had the right understanding that we were looking for. And then so that wasn't too bad, but trying to find the right, especially when I don't know enough about natural language processing to put it on my resume, but I'm trying to hire people who have that experience. You've got to do enough research so that you can ask the right questions. And that was, that was pretty interesting. That was a lot of fun, to be honest with you. But it was surprising to figure out exactly what, in the process, what you needed to look for on a resume to get the right level of experience, because, having some spacey or some hugging face experience doesn't necessarily mean that you are right for the role. And the thing that I think surprised me most was that when we started looking for people who didn't just have like a master's degree in data science or analytics, but were looking for things that were kind of more like applied roles, where you were getting a master's in or PhD in something besides those particular fields, but you had to use machine learning, data science, NLP in order to actually achieve that PhD or that master's. There was a lot of, I found those conversations to be surprisingly useful, because this person is not just, I went through a master's program and got a master's in analytics, and for the capstone, it was like, okay, you get to figure out how to put all of this together and then do it on your own and figure it out. You took all these classes and you get to figure it out. And people with kind of what I'm calling an applied perspective for data science have already been able to do that. And it's just, it was really useful to, kind of suss that out in the process. So that's something I'd recommend is maybe expanding the pool of applicants past just those people that have the master's degrees in analytics and data science. That I think we probably all have seen them or have those ourselves.
Yeah. Did you end up redesigning the job description a bit?
No, we just ended it up taking a while to find the right candidate.
Ben, I see you just put a question in the chat. Want to jump in?
Yeah, hey David, thanks for the time. What are you currently working on to build your skill set? I'm thinking more on the technical side. Obviously, you're doing a lot on the soft skills, but what are some maybe historical stuff that has been in your industry, or some other things outside of your industry that you're working on that's going to advance your skill set that you find interesting, maybe?
So I got to learn about I got to learn a lot about Linux, so tongue twister, because I was the one that got to do the Posit install earlier this year. So that was interesting, challenging. I know a lot more about infrastructure than I ever did now, and I'll file that away for a rainy day. On the data science side of things, I am, where's my book? I'm reading through Max's book, applied predictive modeling, right? And just trying to, kind of wrap my head around things dealing, the different sorts of models and approaches to, maybe kind of cross-validation, statistical machine learning that we'll need, because we tend to use kind of smaller data sets at INPO. So it's, we don't have anything that I would call like big data at the moment. So it's a very particular kind of flavor of data science and machine learning. So I am reading through that, and then just trying to figure out different ways to actually stay up to date with, new models, new algorithms, finding the right papers to read to stay up to date with those sorts of advances. And I haven't really found a great place that kind of centralizes all that information yet. So if anybody else has some ideas about where to look, I think I learned about R Weekly at PositConf this year. So yeah, feel free to share that, because I've got an appetite for it.
I was just saying, I see a lot of great links shared in the chat too. So I'll take those and consolidate them and share with you as well, David.
Thank you. That's excellent.
An anonymous question from a bit earlier was, what are the biggest challenges you face when putting data science solutions in production?
So, I mean, to be honest, we haven't faced a whole lot of that yet, because we are still pretty fresh. My brain goes back to the way that we created a model that, kind of estimates performance in between evaluations and deliver those results. But because that model is such a kind of a tightly guarded secret, I consider it probably the most critical piece of intellectual property we have at INPO, because if anyone finds out what goes into that model, then then there's no way to build a better model. So delivering those results meant that we can't tell people what goes into the model, which means that when a station's value changes, they of course want to know why. That's just a natural thing to ask, and we didn't really give people a great way to explain that, at a kind of a general level. So last year we built a tool to help them kind of interpret that score and the changes to that score. And every time we would build this model, we'd get this mountain of emails asking why this and that changed. And then we built this tool that helps give context to the changes. And now it's kind of crickets every time we publish the model results, which is good news for everyone. Past that, we're going to be building more kind of tools, models, APIs, but we haven't done it yet, so I'm not really sure what the challenges are, right? So, if anyone has any lessons learned, I'm so ready and willing to hear what y'all have learned as part of, kind of pushing out Posit team or any other sort of data science platform.
Yeah, and David, if people do want to connect directly after, is LinkedIn the best way?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll share your LinkedIn in the chat here in a second too. But Nick, I see you just asked a question in the chat. Want to jump in here next?
Hi, yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So basically, I'm trying to relate to something I'm currently going through at work, where we just set up kind of an analytics team. And before the business is willing to really commit any resources and invest, we keep getting this ask to estimate the ROI we expect from the project before the business is willing to commit any time or resources to help us with it. And basically, I'd like to ask you for ideas around how do you approach estimating the ROI from a project before you even, really have the resources or the buy-in to start looking into it. And follow-up question, once a project is implemented, how do you look back and estimate the ROI from a project you've implemented already?
So this is a really challenging question to ask, because we are a nonprofit with a mission to kind of make sure that the industry performs at the highest standards of excellence that we can set. So coming up with an ROI, it's really hard to quantify that, and we have different ways that we do that, but I don't really maybe think that they're more generally applicable to what you're talking about. Kind of from a pure project management standpoint, ideally, I feel like what you would want to do is put together. I was going to try to answer it well, but I don't have a good answer for you. Yeah, it's just it's not something that we deal with in the same way that I think that you do, and I don't feel like I've got a good answer for you.
I
No
can
worries.
share
And it's
one
actually,
from
yeah.
I could share one from another hangout we had with Natalie O'Shea at Better Up. I was trying to find the little clip to share with you, but Natalie shared a bit how when she was going through this process for getting approval for Posit team, she focused in on one specific problem that the team had. And so the use case she gave was they're a consulting organization. So their sales team had to make these PowerPoints over and over again with new data and based on different industries. And to actually make a great deck for a presentation was taking hours and hours. And so they sent out a poll to all of the sales reps to ask how much time were they taking building these, and they actually put a dollar amount to it. And so I think it ended up being like $1.2 million a year in people cost. And then she showed how she could automate that with a Shiny application that the sales team would go to the Shiny app, kind of put in whatever they needed for the customer, and then automatically generate the PowerPoint, which was tied to directly to their database as well. And so, and using that one example, she was able to put a dollar amount to it. So maybe that's one tip, is to think when you're building this business case, to think about one team that you might be able to help, because then they might be the ones kind of joining on to your business case too. Like, I think it was maybe the head of sales that ended up helping push it forward for their data team too.
No, I think that's very useful insight, actually, Rachel. Thanks for that. Only thing is that I think when it comes to automation of daily routine tasks and activities, it's a bit easier to estimate ROI as opposed to, analytics modeling where you're dealing with uncertainty, right? And sometimes you're not even sure if you get anywhere with the time you invest, right? So yeah, it's not an easy task, and I would really appreciate any thoughts or feedback from anyone that's gone through that experience before as well. Cheers.
Nick, this is Eduardo Castillo, and I actually am from the nuclear industry. I know Dave, we're a working group at INPO, and one thing I can offer from a data science perspective is that it's important to kind of go for big targets. So one of the big projects we're working on right now is around reducing diving frequencies for cleaning some of our intake structures, and that's a very big, $1 million a year project where we had no ongoing data science efforts to improve performance of that evolution. And so having a big target, I think, was important, because even if we could cut 5% of that, it becomes a good hard dollar ROI. And the second piece is looking at things like risk. Like when you have like an activity like diving, you do have a lot of occupational risk, and we're actually able to tie what the occupational risk is and how it compares to other activities that we do at the plant. So it allows us to kind of capture both the hard savings and also the qualitative software savings. And again, just starting with a big target, a project that is targeting a big budget, I think it's important.
Thanks, Eduardo.
Yeah, thanks so much. Anybody else want to jump in on this topic? Laura, I see you unmuted. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I can't find the button. Yeah, I was just want to, for the idea about ROI, there's a podcast called Cdio Matters by a guy, Malcolm Hawker. He works at pos.it, doing MDM. And he's got, I listen to his podcast while running. It's a great intellectual thing. It has a lot of information about ROI, especially in light of, you see a lot of these press releases about data teams being laid off. And, those of us in data are like, how can you do that? Data is so important, but again, it's that proof that you're actually impacting the bottom line of the company. And so if you want to dig a little more into that world, I highly recommend his podcasts. They're not too overly fluffy with crap. And they're all quite interesting, about 45 minutes. So highly recommend if that idea of ROI is important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you shared the link maybe in the chat too. So I'll go. Okay.
Cheers, and thanks for the recommendation.
Abigail, do you want to add anything here? I saw your comment in the chat too. Oh, sorry. Yeah, feel free to just raise your hand on here if anybody has anything else to add, but I'll try and jump over to some of the remaining questions too. Let's see. We had quite a few anonymous questions. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. But when we get to the last few minutes here, if there's something you asked that didn't get answered as well, feel free to recopy it into the Zoom chat here. But one of the other questions, David, was, what is your company's relationship as relates to the interface between government and industry?
So that's great. So there's the NRC, which is, kind of the government regulator, and they have all of their own guidelines. They do their own sorts of evaluations. But kind of the whole impetus of INPO was when 3 Mile Island happened. There was this Jimmy Carter put together this commission. It was called the Kimini Commission, and the commission, had a whole lot of findings. One of them was that there needed to be kind of an independent, non-governmental organization to set these sorts of safety and reliability standards, and then to assess them. So we are not really. I mean, we're in the nuclear industry, so of course we're associated with the NRC, but we don't really answer to them. We kind of answer more so to our members, to the domestic nuclear industry. So we're two sort of kind of regulatory bodies that have maybe some different, some overlapping interests, but also some kind of different missions.
Thank you. So a question that I love to get to ask everybody towards the end is there a piece of career advice that stands out to you, whether it's been something that you've received or advice you've given, that you'd like to share with us?
I knew you were going to ask this, so I had to think about it in advance, and I had like 5 or 6 different things that I came up with. The one that I think I want to stick with is be open to doing things that make you feel uncomfortable. So I as a human being, but also professionally, that's kind of where the growth happens. If you just do the same thing day in, day out, you're just going to kind of, tread water in a way. But if you, lean into the things that make you uncomfortable in a healthy way, obviously, then I think that's, that's where you can grow your, your professional relationships, your technical capabilities, like your mental health in a way is kind of, leaning into that and being okay with the discomfort, knowing that, you're going to learn something from it.
Absolutely. Can you share an example with us of where you're doing that?
Being asked to do a data science hangout?
Yes. Awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the other piece, and I've been a part of them for 7 years, is Toastmasters. It's something, working on your communication skills is critical as a data scientist. You can create the coolest model, next big app, that sort of thing. But if you can't really communicate it well, then you're going to have a hard time getting other people to understand why it's so important. So figuring out ways to kind of hone those skills are really, really important, just as much, in my opinion, as kind of the technical skills.
Definitely. Yanin, I see you had asked a question in the chat. Want to jump in here?
Oh, yes. Every time when I listen to some great talk, I would like the speaker to share some good books. Good books you like. Not maybe definitely I love the static books or data science books, but any other books you want to share? I mean, because some words you said is so smart and wise.
That's funny. I'm looking at my bookshelf to see, what kind of pops into my head. Mm-hmm. I'm not employed by Posit, but they do, people that work for Posit have some pretty good books, are for data science. And then also, kind of the elements of statistical learning that was one of the books that I ended up buying as part of my graduate program that I still refer to this day. You know, outside of that, I picked up a book called On Being Nice this past weekend that I really enjoy, and kind of sits well with me. And then there's also a book that started reading called Focus that's really interesting. But these are just kind of things that are off the top of my head. I can't really think of anything else major. But I'd love for people to maybe type into the chat any books that you might recommend, whether they're related to data science or not. I want to see that list.
I like to know. I
does anybody have Libby's link handy? She's been keeping track of all the books recommended in the Hangout.
Oh, that's fun.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm being a bad multitasker today, trying to go find it. So if anybody can share it, that would be great. And I see there's a thank you. I see there's a bit of a kind of sub conversation happening in the chat too, when we were talking about maybe these smaller group chats too, and perhaps having one like a whole discussion on ROI might be a useful one. So I will save this chat here so I can reach out to everybody. But in that thread, if you want to just put your email in there, I'll say right here, I will save that and reach out so we can maybe schedule a separate chat around ROI too. Awesome. So let's see, for any questions that have gone unanswered, does anybody want to raise your hand here and jump in and ask it? I think we have, we've covered most everything. Oh, Michael, there you go.
So I want to see if I can still access the information in the chat, because I do not want to lose them. I've missed some, so I still want to get back to them.
Yes, definitely. So if you want to save the info in the chat, you can use the 3 dots below it where it says more, and then you can press save chat there. But David, I guess to end on a note of,
I don't know. I think the function.
If you want to, Michael, if you want to share your email in the chat, I can email it to you as well if it doesn't work for you. But David, one other question I'd love to ask is, thinking about the year ahead, the 2024, what's something that you're excited about for your team?
So this year was kind of focused on building out what we call our data science environment, getting Posit built, and now it's built, it's stable, and we're ready to use it. And I'm just excited to try to figure out all the different ways that we could deliver these really incredible data science products to kind of to the industry at large, and then also to InPo internally. It's just it's something that we've never really had, and really excited to I don't know, to put it to good use.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, David, for joining us today, and thank you all for all the great questions and spending your Thursday with us. I'm trying to get better about saying this, but I talk to a lot of people from companies who might not know that other teams within their company are using our tools. So if you are ever just curious and want to chat with us about it, I made a little form for myself so that it was in one place. So feel free to put your name there, and I'm happy to connect you with others within your company too. But thank you again for spending time with us today. Really appreciate it, David.
Thank you,
Rachel. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.